And somebody who interacted with Jessie Duarte over a series of years is our very own international news editor, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, good evening to you and welcome. You know, sometimes we look at, people that we interact with in our journalistic work as people who might be there forever. And suddenly you have the passing of someone who was, a notable figure that we interacted with often as the media. What are your personal reflections of the times that you interviewed Jessie Duarte?
Well, I started speaking to Jessie Duarte when I was a current affairs anchor at the Lesedi FM, and then it was called Sesotho Stereo, when she was the MEC for safety in Gauteng under Tokyo Sehwale. So I used to speak to her about issues that were related to crime in South Africa. And later, when I became a political reporter, of course, I interacted with her, particularly when she was the spokesperson of the ANC, but also as a journalist, particularly during the time in the month of August, when we look at the role women played in the struggle. One used to speak to her a lot. But also recently, much as I am the international news editor, during the local government elections at the Rock, where you have the results for elections. I spoke to her after it was clear that ANC has done badly, particularly in metros. She was very, very hurt. I remember her calling me and talking to me and saying, Sophie, I am hurt. I can't believe my movement is facing such challenges to an extent that we didn't perform well. I am hurt, particularly losing the economic hub, that is Johannesburg, the perhaps most powerful GDP on the continent, and therefore she was hurt. And I'm not surprised when I heard the ANC Treasurer General saying that after that it wasn't all well with her and they thought she will come back, but she didn't come back. She was very, very hurt. And two, you'd recall that the former president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, wrote a letter to her talking about the outcome of the elections and what needs to be done in terms of trying to save the ANC. And remember, she had to receive all those difficult messages and news, and also to communicate messages to the ANC membership, but also to ordinary South Africans. Who can forget when she had to play a role communicating the recall of former President Thabo Mbeki then, when she was a spokesperson of the ANC after Polokwane conference. And then, of course, later, a man that she was very close to, Jacob Zuma, when he was recalled, she had to again be at the forefront as the Deputy Secretary General, then to also communicate this message, and her being sent to Mahlabandlovu. On arrival, they had problems with security, and they had to send a second backup to ensure that the security was able to open for the ANC delegation at night. I remember we were at Irene waiting for the delegation that went to President Jacob Zuma's official residence in Mahlabandlovu to come back so that we can know what was happening. And therefore, and then later, the divisions within the ANC, she had to communicate those tough decisions, even though personally she had a particular viewpoint and soft spot for the former president of the ANC. And therefore, that's how I have known her, very, very feisty. The second issue, Iman, which is very important for me, she was very vocal on issues related to women empowerment, particularly within the ANC. She was very vocal that the ANC is still dominated by men in terms of leadership. And two, she was very vocal in terms of ensuring that ANC does go back to its roots of being an organization that stands for multi-racialism and also accommodating the other smaller groups. I remember towards the Nasrec conference, I was doing a story of one of the ANC stalwart who had passed on at Lenasia. And I was talking to her. She was in tears, saying that it's said that people like that stalwart had fought so hard, and many others, white, colored, and Indians, to ensure that ANC is a formidable force, and finally the country was liberated. But it was, at that time, it seems that there's smaller groups who are being sidelined. And she was very, very vocal. So I was not surprised that Nazareth, when she came back, representing a powerful support and vote from women, but also a vote that was seen as people who are saying ANC must go back to be an inclusive party in terms of race, color, and gender.
And that focus on women's emancipation goes back, as we've been sharing with our viewers, all the way to her being, you know, from the days when she was the secretary of the Federation for Transvaal Women. I think FEDTRAW was the acronym, under the tutelage of Ma Albertina Sisulu. So certainly a long track record of fighting for women's rights in various spheres inside the ANC as well. You know, as you're reflecting there on, you know, how she shared with you at The Rock her true feelings about the ANC's fortunes and how they performed, that almost tender side where she kind of showed you her heart a little bit, not a picture of Jessie Duarte that the media is familiar with in terms of, you know, the various run-ins that she's had with the media, her kind of formidable hard line, you know, which has resulted in, you know, all sorts of different labels, including that of bully. But it was interesting in the conversation I just had with Professor Sabc, understanding where that comes from in her own pathology of why that defense of the ANC is so central. How would you read her relationship with the media against this backdrop?
With my little experience, not claiming to be perhaps an expert in this thing of being a political reporter or media, the reality is Jessie was very committed to the ANC, and she defended the ANC at all costs. But also, she had a feeling that some of us, maybe, we were too hard on the ANC. We didn't understand the responsibility the ANC has in the society, but also we don't understand the fact that ANC is a broad church. You have different characters, and these different characters will behave in different ways. But also, at times, it was at the time where she's dealing with something very, very, very difficult as a ANC leader, but also an ordinary human being. For example, the issue related to President Jacob Zuma, because you'd recall that she was a spokesperson of the ANC and therefore very close to the top six, but also she went to the presidency at some point in time, working in the office of President Jacob Zuma. But due to personality clash, perhaps with the then chief whip or person who was in charge of that office, she had to go back to Little House and later elected as the Secretary General. And therefore, in most cases, she was dealing with difficult issues within the ANC. We know, you can see how the ANC looks like right now. You can imagine if you have to deal with some of these difficult choices. I mean, as the ANC is currently preparing to go to the conference, you can see the forces and the fights and the divisions. You must pull this organization together to ensure that you have a successful conference. You have to communicate some of the difficult decisions, you know, talking about the suspension of Ace Magashule. I mean, they've worked together, they knew each other. I mean, she got support from Free State when she became the Deputy Secretary General, and that time the ANC was led by Magashule. So in terms of politics, you can see that there was an alliance. Therefore, you have now to communicate this. So sometimes her feistiness would lead to a situation where she might perhaps lose it. But all of us, I mean, all of us, no one was spared. Even myself, I can tell you lots of stories. But I think generally one has to understand that you are in this profession as a journalist. All newsmakers are the same. No single newsmaker doesn't have her faults or his faults in terms of fighting with journalists. The same with us journalists. We do err, we do make mistakes. And therefore, I think it's the nature of human beings.
Sophie Mokoena, thank you very much for dipping into your experience box and sharing some of those anecdotes of your interactions with Jessie Duarte. Of course, we will continue to bring you more interviews on this day of her passing.